We're going to begin this hour with more on the case of a Virginia couple that was murdered nearly 40 years ago and the convicted killer who's fighting to clear his name. Derek and Nancy Haysom were found stabbed to death in their home back in 1985. Their daughter, Elizabeth Haysom, and her then boyfriend, his name is Yen Soring, spent nearly 30 years in prison for the crime. Now, Soring originally confessed to the killings, but he later recanted. Yesterday, we showed you how the podcast, it's called Small Town, Big Crime, reinvestigated this case. For part 2 of this story, our Nikki Battiste looks at new details they uncovered and shares more of her interview with Soring.
We believed that in order to get to the truth, we needed to do some DNA testing and try to figure out who actually was at the crime scene.
Small Town Big Crime podcast hosts Rachel Ryan and Courtney Stewart have spent much of their 3-year investigation into the 1985 Haysom murders, focusing on DNA.
There's tons of evidence from the case that had never been tested, and that's what we really would like to see done.
DNA testing was still in its infancy when Yen Soring was put on trial in 1990, charged in the murders of his girlfriend's parents.
At the time of the trial, was there significant physical evidence pointing to Yen's?
There were a couple of pieces of evidence that I think really swayed the jury. The first thing was sock prints. There was also O blood found at the crime scene. Neither one of the victims have O blood. Yen Soring does have O blood. No DNA testing was done at that time because DNA testing was very new then. And then the biggest thing that I think convicted Jens was his confession.
Sock print comparison is junk science, but that sock print is too small to be mine.
Soring was paroled in 2019 and now lives in Germany. We spoke with him over Zoom.
Did you murder Nancy or Derek Haysom?
Absolutely not.
Soring has spent decades trying to clear his name, garnering high-profile support from people like author John Grisham and actor Martin Sheen. Soring has asked for new DNA testing, which the Virginia Department of Forensic Science did conduct in 2009. Of the 42 samples connected to the crime scene that were tested, 31 were too small or degraded to yield results. The rest were not a match for Soring or his girlfriend Elizabeth Haysom, including that O blood used to convict him.
No part, no smidgen, nothing of that type of blood belongs to me.
The podcasting team also wanted to test items from the scene that had never been tested before. They laid out a list of 23 items, including a can of soda, a cigarette butt, and hairs found in the kitchen. They filed a petition for new DNA testing with Bedford County.
We found out that journalists in Virginia do not have standing to request DNA testing in closed cases. And so we were thrilled to find out that perhaps Yen Soring could use our petitions as a roadmap to create his own, and he could petition the court for DNA testing.
What was Yen's reaction?
At first, he said, okay, thanks. We emailed him the petitions. And then a week later, he said, I'm gonna have my attorneys look at them. And then months went by.
What are you thinking at this point?
We were shocked. And it just didn't make sense because he'd been saying for years that he wanted to clear his name.
What the podcasters told me is that you can petition to have evidence that's never been tested for DNA tested.
It's not true that under Virginia's statute that I can do that. It is simply not true. It's not what my lawyers tell me.
Soring is referring to a Virginia law that says a convicted person who is seeking new DNA testing must meet certain criteria. They must be able to say under oath that items being tested have not been altered, tampered with, or contaminated. Soring says that's something he cannot do. A new DNA testing petition would first go to Wes Nance, the current Commonwealth's attorney in Bedford County, Virginia.
Can Yen Soring file a petition in Virginia to have DNA retested?
I think he could file the petition, but it would have a fatal flaw attached to it.
Which is?
That the items in question have been contaminated over the years. There's really no log of who looked at it, what was looked at, what was not.
At the time of our interview, Soring told us he feared he could be charged with perjury if he pursued a petition, because he would have to say under oath the items have not been contaminated.
So if Jens or his attorneys filed the petition and said, we can't prove chain of custody, he could protect himself from that concern of a perjury charge.
Correct. That would be an accurate filing.
Yeah, that's news to me.
Hearing what Mr. Nance has said in a hypothetical situation, would you consider filing a petition to have this evidence that's never been tested for your DNA?
If my lawyers say so, yeah. But my lawyers have told me that that's not possible.
I understand, and I think people will respect that you want to take your legal guidance. But a lot of people will still just think it's your life.
Actually, no. It's the podcasters trying to create a controversy where there is none, okay?
If Soring did file a petition, Nance says he would leave the decision to a Bedford County judge.
I don't see this as a gotcha moment against Mr. Soring. I think we're talking about the question of whether you could file an unsuccessful petition and whether that proves anything. The legal standard that the judge would have to make to order these items retested just simply isn't there.
Still, Nance believes in Soring's guilt.
You know, Mr. Soring was convicted of a juror of his peers with the highest legal standard in the legal system, beyond a reasonable doubt. He then went through appeals. At some point, it becomes a question of how many bites at the apple does he have?
Who do you think killed the Haysoms?
I can't answer that definitively at this point, and DNA testing, I think, could answer that question.
Soring provided us emails that show he did previously ask Wes Nance for new DNA testing. Soring says he spent a significant amount of time with his lawyers trying to figure out how to do DNA testing, but again concluded it was not legally possible. Stuart and Ryan are getting started on season 2 of their podcast, investigating a different crime, another crime.
Wow. I'm looking forward to season 2, but let's talk about season 1 some more.
I'm so confused, though, by the DNA testing, because he wanted it, now he doesn't want it, and then you hear the one attorney say, well, there's a fatal flaw if he does do it.
It's complicated. Basically, the DNA in this case has been accessible by the public, by journalists. It's been touched by a lot of people. The larger point is that Jens Soring, for years, has gone on TV shows, has written books proclaiming his innocence.
Yes.
And saying that there's 2 other suspects that were not paying
attention. His lawyers said that, right? I'll address them in a second. And people who believe Jens is guilty don't understand why he wouldn't just file this petition, which we now know, according to Wes Nance, wouldn't have any legal ramifications. It's up to the judge. Worst that could happen is the judge says, no, DNA is too contaminated. The 2 other suspects that Jens Soring's legal team said possibly committed these murders, the podcasters, Rachel and Courtney, were able to gather their DNA, had it tested against the evidence in the case, and it does not point to them.
Wow. And have they ever been suspects?
Not officially.
Not officially.
I say kudos to Rachel and Courtney.
Yes, they've done a fantastic job. I'm excited for their second season.
A lot of good work on this.
Wow.
Yeah, excited for the second season.